days. I told Brian the other day when I come in the house, I want that music to play. He's like, yeah, no. Good morning. My name is Amy Banbury, and I am used to being up here, usually behind the protection and comfort of a microphone stand, singing my heart out. So this is super uncomfortable for me and totally out of my comfort zone, and I might puke. And it's like Shamu at SeaWorld. You guys might be in danger of that going on. But as much as I feel like I am supposed to be doing this today, it is totally stretching me, which is kind of what this entire Wonder Woman series is about. So for the final time on the last week of this series, let's check out the graphic one more time. So Wonder Woman, becoming all that God intended you to be. And how are we supposed to ever become more, let alone all that God intends us to be, if we are never willing to be uncomfortable and stretch beyond what is familiar to us? So as I allow God to stretch me, and as we close this series together today, I have the great honor of talking to you about this, the source of power. And when Rob got all of his Wonder Women together and came up with this idea, and then I met with him this week, and he's like, this is kind of what my vision is and what I think you should talk about. And I was like, okay, cool. It's the last week. Everyone knows the source of power is God, so we'll all just take a vote, agree it's God, and we're all out here in like 5 minutes. And Rob's like, yeah, no. And I'm like, okay. So I get bonus points for trying, but you're stuck here a little longer. But God is the source, right? Laura told us week 1 that the real secret of power is that it belongs to God, and not you and not me. But if we all know that we are not the source of power and God is, why don't we have more of it? And what I really want to talk about today is how you and I can access some of that abundant, infinite, more than any other superhero power that our God has, an unlimited supply and wants to be generous with. So why don't you pray with me? Father God, I ask that you put words in my mouth, and may those words be yours and used for your purposes. And I ask that you make us all sponges this morning, God, and allow us to soak in the next few minutes of what you want us to hear. And fill this place with your presence and show up in a big way. In your name I ask, amen. So our text today is 2 Corinthians 12, and this is where our series verse is located. It's what we've alluded to the past several weeks during the series. But before we get to this text, I want to kind of give you a little background about Paul. I want to set up the context before we get there. And I want to let you know, just a little heads up, that I am not a Bible scholar. Shocking. I'm not. It doesn't come easy to me. Like, I'll read the Bible, and then it just does not make sense. And I'm a big lover of the Bible for Idiots at the Loudonville Library. I have it right now, so you can't get it, but I love it. And I'm a big follower of the Message version. It just makes more sense to me. It's normal. And so when I have issues trying to understand things, I have 2 sources. And the first one is my dad. And my dad is a pastor. I'm a preacher's kid, which probably explains a lot about me. But we were in the church more than we were out of it. And my dad has a way of explaining things to me where it makes sense and I understand, and I get it. And my second source is Rob. I will text him and be like, what are you talking about? And he dumbs it down and speaks like human English to me, and I get it. So I want to give to you the 5 facts of Paul by my dad and Rob. What you need to know. Number 1, Paul was the best of the best. A Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was smart, he was passionate, and my dad says probably the greatest missionary of all time. Number two, he was a Jew, and he was also a Roman citizen, which was not the norm, and this got him perks that almost nobody else had. Number 3, before becoming a follower of Jesus, he passionately tried to snuff out Christianity by persecuting and killing Christians. Number 4, God transformed Paul and helped him to see that Christianity was actually the way. And number 5, and probably most important, was God used Paul more than anyone to start and establish the church and see the message of Jesus spread and take root, no matter what the cost was to Paul. So in the text you're about to see, Paul is talking about visions and revelations that he got to see 14 years previous. How he was caught up to the third heaven. How God took him to paradise where he heard inexpressible things that no one's even permitted to tell. He had this special experience. And in talking to Rob, Paul didn't know if it was a vision, if it really happened to him, but he had this experience. So take a look at this text, 2 Corinthians 12, 5 to 10. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. So Paul's saying, I will boast about certain things, general types of people and attributes that may or may not apply to me. And even though these do directly apply to him, he won't boast about himself, which I would. I would tweet about it. I'd Facebook about it. Wouldn't we all? Don't sit there and act like you wouldn't. You know you would. But he takes it even further, doesn't he? And he says not only will he not boast about the things he is good at or the things he's actually experienced, but he tells us he will only boast about his weaknesses. And that is so not our culture. So take a look at the text again. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. So for Paul to do this would not be making things up or stretching the truth in any way at all. These things happened to Paul. They are his actual stories. So if Paul would be speaking the truth to tell these things, and if you and I had something like this happen, these would be our first and our best stories. So why is Paul not talking about them? So the text continues and it says, but I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say because of these surpassingly great revelations. But God gave these revelations to Paul. Philippians 3 tells us this about Paul. It says, if someone else thinks they have no reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law, faultless. Now I had to get the Message version out to figure that out. But basically it's saying that if anybody could brag about himself, boast about himself, post about it on Facebook, tweet about it, it is Paul. Paul's the guy. But God used Paul to start and spread the church. And if there is anyone we should think of and think more of, Paul would be a great candidate. So take a look at the text as it continues, and it says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. And Paul is saying that if all he did was tell stories about all the great things that he's been part of, even though all these stories are true, the end result of that is only one thing. It's conceitedness. And I love this part, but it says the problem isn't only that others may start to see Paul and miss God, but that Paul would start to see his greatness and he would miss God's greatness as well. And so the solution that Paul received was a thorn in his flesh, something that was a torment to him. And you look in the Bible and it never really says what this was. People have speculated that it was a limp, a stutter. Some people have talked about it being an issue with his eyes, some kind of seepage. Maybe it was a sin or some kind of overwhelming temptation. It never really says what it is, but it's something that was a detriment to him. He hated it. He wanted it gone. And while we don't know exactly what this was, Paul's telling us that even though he detested it, it was a helpful tool in keeping him humble and helping his eyes to stay focused on God. And so take a look at the text. It says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Father, I hate this. God, this is limiting me. And just think of how much more I could do with my life for you if this wasn't part of my life. So on multiple occasions, Paul asked, and he begged, and he pleaded for this to be taken away. We would, right? How many messy situations, how many problems with your marriage, your kids, sickness, disease, every day do you ask God to take it away? And here we see that it's altogether fine for us to ask God to take things away from us. But just as Paul had to continue living with this, there too may be a greater purpose and why God has something in our lives that we would prefer not be there. The text says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God is saying, I am enough for you. I'm enough. The answer to your issue or your struggle or this thorn is not for it to go away, but for you to see me in it and know that I'm with you. So whether the thing goes or the thing stays or it gets worse, God's enough. And in fact, if things get even worse, that's good news for you, because God's power is not made perfect in your strength, but in your weakness. And as Rob would say, this next part is mind-blowing. Take a look at this next text. It says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties." And this is something none of us want to do naturally. Many of you may know me as the blood drive lady or the lady who sings, and I like those things, and I'm good at those things, and they're good things. But there are other things about my life and my story and my family that I don't want you to know, let alone talk about them, boast about them, brag about them, post about them, and take delight in them. But Paul is telling us over and over here that it is in those moments when we are weak that the power of Christ comes and rests on us, our lives, and our situations. And take a look at this next text. "For when I am weak, then I am strong." So now that we have seen what Paul has to say, I want to share with you this. My 3 paths to power. And they are probably a million of these paths. They're probably not necessarily the best paths, but they're mine. I own them. Yours are probably different. But I'm going to share the 3 of mine with you. And this is my first one. Sickness. It is not a surprise to you. I have talked about it before, unless this is your first time at New Hope. It's not a secret, but I have battled cancer for the past 20 years. And I sat down and tried to figure out the length of time during those 20 years where I haven't had a procedure or chemo or radiation or something going on pertaining to cancer in the last 20 years. And it's been maybe about 22 to 24 months that I've been cancer-free during that time. And I was originally diagnosed in 1998. I had cancer since then in my uterus, my ovary, my fallopian tubes, my cervix, my brain, my lungs, behind my eye, my pancreas, my stomach, and my esophagus. Brian and I have had countless discussions with different doctors about plans and medicines and clinical trials and last-ditch efforts and special juice that you drink on Wednesday that by Friday you're cured and all that good stuff. We've had countless discussions about time and what it looks like and what our future looks like and what we should prepare for and what we should have ready. And cancer has become a normal conversation in my house. We talk about it as much as we talk about going to the grocery store or letting the dog out. It's just a normal thing. So last summer I began to have some issues. I was just doing some weird stuff. I would repeat the same sentence 3 or 4 times. I would stutter. I would go out to get the mail the same day like 3 or 4 times when I'd already got it on the first time. And so I mentioned it to my oncologist, and he was like, you've had a ton of radiation and chemo. It's probably just, messing with your head. And it just continued, and I had a routine scan that showed that, in fact, I had a tumor back here by my ear, which made total sense because that's your cognitive part of your brain, and that's what was going on. It's small, and your brain can only take so much radiation at a time. So he's like, let's just wait. We'll monitor you every month. We'll do a scan. If it gets bigger, we'll face it then. But let's not give you radiation now when this is small, when it's a one-time thing. Let's wait and see if it gets bigger. All right. So come this fall, I began to have issues with my shoulder. And it was funny at first, and I know it's not funny, but it's funny because in these situations, you can get so sucked into the doom and gloom and the depression and the misery of it all that you've got to find some stuff funny. And I remember going to the doctor, and I said, my shoulder is really bothering me. And he looked at me, and he's like, well, were you running? Have you been biking? Are you exercising? And I looked at him like, do I look like I run? And when I run like to the fridge and then back to the couch. So no, I didn't hurt my shoulder exercising or running. And I'm a klutz, but I can't remember falling and hurting it at all. And it got to the point where, it was every night. And then it became every night and every day. And then, you couldn't get your clothes off by yourself. You couldn't brush your hair. It just became this horrible, nonstop pain. I went to the doctor. They sent me to an orthopedic guy. He's like, let's do a CAT scan. He knew my history, but he's like, I really think there's a ligament or something torn in there. Let's do that. I said, all right. CAT scan showed nothing. So went through the whole, routine of doing physical therapy and cortisone shots, and nothing helped. So he's like, let's do an MRI. Let's see maybe if there's something there that the CAT scan didn't show. And sure enough, it shows this. So the round part right there is the head of my shoulder. The white thing in the middle is the tumor. And then I was at the doctor, and I'm like, I am Wonder Woman. Look at the muscle, that white part on the edge of my x-ray. And she's like, that's fat. And I said, oh. All right. Well, so I walked out of there deflated. Let's just go with muscle. Anyway, so they sent me to the James, and he's like, I don't know if it's benign or malignant. I really have no idea. Let's do a bone scan. Do the bone scan, and if you're not familiar with a bone scan, it's a scan of your whole body. It shows things that shouldn't be there, and it lights up what shouldn't be there. So this lights up, and this lights up. So I had a new one in the front of my head. So he said, the head right now is not our worry. He's like, let's focus on the shoulder. It's what's causing you pain. I said, all right. They send me to an orthopedic surgeon. She's like, let's go in and take it out. She's like, let's get rid of the junk that's in there, a lot of inflammation, a lot of stuff that just shouldn't be there, and then I'll go in and get the tumor and take it out. And I don't know how I know, but I know that surgery on March 8th was quick. And I remember coming out thinking, there is no way she did what she said she's going to do, because it hadn't been that long. Sure enough, she came in and she said, I kind of cleaned up what I could clean up, but your tumor's too deep into the head of your shoulder. And I just kind of got this feeling that this was not the doctor for me. Like, she almost didn't feel comfortable with it. She just was too hesitant. And so thankfully, she's like, I want you to go see an orthopedic oncologist. And I was like, okay. So I went to him. His name is Dr. Weiner. Dr. Weiner said, I don't know why we're pussyfooting about whether it's benign or malignant. Let's do a biopsy. That way we know for sure what we're dealing with. I said, okay. So we go in, we do a biopsy, and sure enough, in my shoulder, it's bone cancer, and it's malignant. So 2 days later, which was the May blood drive, that's why I wasn't here, which killed me, we went in and did surgery. They opened the head of my shoulder, burred into the middle of it. They removed that tumor. They filled it with bone cement, put a plate on it to keep it a little more stable because I am right-handed. And then they scraped any suspicious spots around that area that looked like there might be an issue. Biopsy report comes back, and they found cancer in my shoulder, outside of my shoulder, down my arm bone, and then into my clavicle and my chest. And I wasn't going to put this picture in here, but if I'm up here this morning being transparent and you guys are going to be in on the highs and the lows of my life, then you're going to see this picture. And if it's too graphic, then don't look too bad, because we're a family and we're going to see it, and here you go. So this is the picture of my arm about, I would say, a week maybe so. After surgery, my incision is up there on the top, and then it had just started to drain down into my arm. And I looked, honestly, this is gross, but I just looked like my entire right side had been hit by a truck. It was horrible. It was painful. It was just not fun. And I got to tell you a story, again, trying to find the humor in this. I'm pretty good with anesthesia. And in the past 20 years, I've had a ton of stuff done. And I don't know if this time it was just because I had had the one surgery and then the biopsy and then the big surgery so close together. But I remember waking up in the recovery room and one of the nurses just in my face going, shh, 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 shh. It's okay, shh, tell me to shush. And they had scraped my clavicle, so every time she tapped me, like I wanted to punch her because it hurt. But I was so out of it, I couldn't. But I remember her distinctly telling me to shush. And so they take me out of that waiting room or that recovery room and take me like to the next step down room before I get to go back to my original room with Brian. And the lady comes over to me, and my doctor's name is Dr. Weiner, but it's spelled Weiner. And I'm a mom, and where I'm from, that's pronounced Wiener. So she then goes to tell me that when I was in the recovery room, I announced to the doctors and the nurses and the anesthesiologists and all the staff in there, and maybe Dr. Weiner, that his name is Wiener. And he didn't want to be called Dr. Wiener. So he has you all calling him Dr. Weiner. And she tells me this, and those sheets are paper thin anyway, but I remember trying to pull them up over my head because I was so embarrassed. And so I'm sitting there just ready to cry. And this other lady comes over and she goes, "Oh, honey, don't you worry about it. You just said what we've all been thinking for years." So I felt a little better, but I've seen him 3 times since then, and I still cannot look him in the face because I don't know if he knows. And every time I want to call him Dr. Wiener and not Dr. Weiner. One of these times I'm going to do it. I know I am. But yeah, I said something to Brian. Brian's like, "Well, let's just be glad that's all you said and just go with it." But, I've never been, in my entire cancer journey, I've never been in this much pain. Bone pain is no joke. I just am struggling to figure out how to go back to day-to-day life and to use your arm, and you're shocked at when you don't have one arm, how much you use the one arm you don't have. And it's been a struggle. I'm hooked on my ice machine when I'm home and haven't done much since then. But I can also tell you that during this 20 years that I've never felt so much love and support as I have from this church family the last 2 months. And the phone calls and the texts and the meals ministry, Lana and her ministry team have been amazing. They have filled our bellies tenfold. People showing up with food that aren't even on the meals ministry. It's just been nonstop loving on us. And I know, some of the guys in here might not understand, but the women in here, if you're a wife or you're a mom, you know that just a simple thing of making dinner and knowing you don't have to get up and go do that, it's a huge blessing. It seems so small, but just knowing that it's taken care of and you're going to eat and you don't have to worry about it and you can just stay where you're at has been huge. So I really, from the bottom of Brian in my heart, I thank you for that. And I also have to say that there are a group of women here that have come into my life and have been a blessing. And if you know me, I do not like girls. When Bethany talked a couple weeks ago, I am her people. I am one of those individuals. You put me in a group of guys and I'm great. But women, I just can't handle it. I'm not a fan of chicks. And I struggle with that. I do. So it's weird. It's a different feeling because this group of women has just loved on me and spoken into my life through this journey. And you know who you are, and I thank you all for that humongously. The current plan is to do radiation and chemo once the swelling and the bruising subsides, but radiation can prevent healing, so we got to give it a little while to kind of settle down, and then we'll move on. I can say with utmost assurance that specifically during the last 10 years or so, that God has not left my side. And I can also be honest and transparent and human and tell you that there are mornings when I get up and I don't feel that way. And there are times when I go to bed at night ticked that in the morning I have to deal with this again. I'm just being honest. I am not, rainbow bright every day. There are times when I have felt completely alone and weak. But when I calm down and I get my act together, I realize that God has always been there with a plan and a purpose for my life. And it might not be the plan and the purpose that I've had in mind, but he has never left me astray. He's held on to me like a father holding on to his newborn baby. He's never let go of my hand, and he's guided every step that I've taken. And my faith in him, even in times of weakness, has grown by leaps and bounds during these past 10 years or so in this time of trial. My second and my third path to power could probably really fall under the title of relationships. So while I'm going to talk about a couple specific types of relationships, if you have relationships at all, which who doesn't? Your boss, your coworker, your husband, your wife, your neighbor. It's a potential path to power for you, no matter how painful and difficult it might be. And you've heard throughout the series how we are bad friends, specifically females. We treat each other poorly, we gossip, we tear each other down, we keep others at arm's length. But we even do that in my next path to power, and that's my marriage. And I know this is just not me, because in staff meeting we get requests every week, specifically for marriages, generally for marriages. This next picture is Brian and I. We've been married 23 years this fall, and Brian and I met in high school. I grew up in Gahanna. I lived there till my junior year. My graduating class was 864 students, and I came to Loudonville where my graduating class was 89. It was culture shock. And I remember Brian walking into Mrs. Kaufman's algebra class thinking he was the biggest dork I've ever met in my life. And I remember going home. For some reason, he was excused and could come in late to algebra class because he was turkey hunting. And I'm a city girl. And I remember going home and telling my mom, they kill turkeys here. And, they don't buy them for Thanksgiving, but they shoot them and they kill them. And he wore camo pants into class. And I don't know what happened, but he became, it for me. We graduated at Loudonville High School, and I became pregnant with Hayden a month after graduation. And Brian and I, prior to getting pregnant, his plan was to go to Hocking College and pursue his degree in wildlife. And I had received a full ride scholarship from music to a college in West Virginia because I was going to be the next Sandi Patty. And I remember us having a discussion that Brian had to go to school, that he had to leave. And if we had any kind of future, he needed to go. But I couldn't. There was no way I could go down there, be that far. It was 6 hours away from my mom and my dad in Gahanna. And so I stayed. And I resented him hugely because Brian got to leave. Brian got to pursue college. Brian's belly didn't get big. Brian wasn't stuck in a town where people talk. I was an angry individual. So Brian and I didn't speak for about a year or so. Brian didn't meet Hayden until Hayden was almost a year old, maybe a year and a couple months. And I don't really know what happened. I think at some point he was home for the summer and I called him and we reconnected and we've been together ever since. But we had a rough start. And Brian and I love each other, and in part because of how much work we've put into our marriage over the years. But anyone who tells you that marriage isn't work and that it's fun and it's easy all the time either has not been married or is delusional, because that's not true. Marriage is work, and it's not always 50-50. And I remember my dad, I remember being downstairs at the Lutheran church and my dad coming downstairs to see me before we got married saying Now, you know it's not 50-50. And that's not true. And it can be 80-20. It can be 90-10. But as long as one of you is putting forth some effort, it's work. And there are days when I love Brian, but there are days when I don't like him at all. And I'm sure he would say the exact same thing for me. And while I am up here, I might as well confess there are days when I want to put bleach into his sleep apnea machine. I might as well confess that I'm up here. I might as well say it. There are times when either Brian or I have had one foot out the door. But thankfully, we haven't had one foot out the door at the same time. We've sought guidance in times of struggle, and we continually try to work on our marriage. And this makes no sense. I've said it before, and even when I say it as many times as I've had, and some of you will totally understand, but marriage almost has been a blessing. Marriage has been a blessing, but cancer has almost been a blessing. Because cancer allows you to refocus. It has a way of bringing things back into perspective. It has a way in our marriage of kind of knocking us on the shoulder and saying, oh yeah, you guys, we are a team. We can do this together. We can make these decisions together, figure out what to do much better together than we can apart. And lately, with this current issue with my shoulder and the surgery, he has been a rock star. And I know that's his job as my spouse, and that's what he's supposed to do. But again, you don't know what you can't do without your one arm. Getting up from the toilet, putting your shirt on, cutting your piece of chicken, putting on your seatbelt. Just things that you just take totally for granted. You can't do it. And he has been there, every step of the way. And again, I know that's his job. I know that's his responsibility. But he has just been a rock star through this whole thing, and I'm just super, super thankful for that. My final path to power is probably my most difficult. And it's funny because, you would think cancer would be difficult. But this one is probably my most difficult, and it's my kids. And this is a picture of my kids. That is Hayden in the plaid. He's 25, and McKenna is 21. And as every parent knows, your kids are always your kids, which can fill your life with pride, but also great stress and pressure, and I'll be honest, sometimes complete and utter misery. You guys probably know McKenna better since she has been active at New Hope. She's kind of grown up here. Hayden, not so much, and I'll be honest and tell you that for the past probably 7 years, we haven't had much of a relationship with Hayden. In the past couple months, there's been some communication. He is at our house, but every day it is a struggle. Every single day with him. And I talked to him prior to this, and I said, what do you want me to say? What do you want me not to say? And he's like, Mom, say it all. Say whatever you need to say. He's like, people know what I've done. They know, the situation, and you do you, and you say what you need to say. In the past, with our kids, we have dealt with issues with the law, substance abuse, addiction, relational mistakes, and mental health issues. And I'm going to be honest and tell you that in the past 45 days or so, our lives with our kids have been turned upside down. And it stunk. And I was in the kitchen yesterday, and Brian was talking. He was trying to, get me to chill out. And he said, children, Amy, are a gift from God. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have one of those aha moments. Like Brian is going to be like, ah. And he goes, children are a gift from God until the devil get a hold of them and turn them into complete idiots. And I said, yeah, you're right. When our children make decisions that are not the best, it can be difficult. But when they make decisions that are destructive and could have lifelong consequences and maybe even end their life, it's excruciating to both witness and to live with. And as I have been sharing my 3 paths to power, some of you have been thinking, those don't sound much like paths to power. They may be paths to depression, paths to wine therapy, paths to anger, but how are they paths to power? And don't get me wrong, I would much rather talk to you up here about good things and successes and strengths, and I would much rather boast about all my natural perfection and power. And I honestly hate that I'm the perfect person to stand up here this morning and tell you about these powers, but I am the perfect person to give this message. And I came across this Max Lucado book titled God Will Carry You Through at a bookstore at Exponential. And if you don't know what Exponential is, it's a conference that I went to in February with Rob and Bethany and others from the church, and it was amazing. But I'm not a book reader. I wish I was. I think I'd be much cooler and more knowledgeable if I did. I just can't do it. I can listen to a podcast, I can listen that way, but I just can't sit down and read a book. But this book caught my attention because his writing is so down to earth, and it's so understandable, and it just makes sense to me. And I picked the book up this week, and it was just one of those times where you just pick it up and, book roulette. You pick it up and you read wherever it opens, and it just hit me in the gut because it was perfect. And it said, there is nothing trite about your wheelchair, your empty pantry, or your aching heart. These are uphill, into the wind challenges you are facing, and they aren't easy. But nor are they random. God is not sometimes sovereign, and he is not occasionally victorious. He does not occupy the throne one day and vacate it the next. This season of weakness in which you find yourself may puzzle you, but it does not bewilder God. He can and will use it for his purpose. And if we are going to take all the scriptures seriously, no matter how much we may resist this, the main thought that Paul was trying over and over to drum into our heads was this: for when I am weak, then I am strong. Because in my strength, that is all I get. My strength, my best, and my all, which on many days seems fine and good. And trust me, I would much rather have my strength than cancer riddling my body, a rocky marriage at times, and kids causing me to cuss on a daily basis. But it's only in my weakness that Christ's strength comes, and it rests on me, and I get so much more. And before you are tempted to leave here today and go out to your car and go, oh, don't you feel bad for that girl that sings at New Hope and has cancer? I want you to know that this message is not for or about me. It's for and about you too. Because our scripture says, for when you are weak, then you are strong. And if you want to be a Wonder Woman or a superhero, the only path to that kind of power is through weakness. Your strength and mine are finite, but we know someone who has infinite power. But as long as we have just enough of our own strength, most of us will take the path of least resistance and will take the easy way out. And I've done it and I've tried. But if we would only embrace our weakness, what we would get would and will be exponentially better. Because when we are weak, then we are strong. Let's pray. Father God, I ask you to remind us of the power we have in you when we embrace our weakness. And I ask, God, that you remind us on a daily basis that you have not abandoned us, you haven't forgotten us, and you never left. And whatever kind of weakness we are experiencing right now, Lord, I ask that you be with us in the dark. And you hear us call out to you, asking for your help and your power to see beyond the darkness and see your hand, your promise, and your unfailing love. Help us to see your face in our weakness, feel your power in our weakness, and have faith that you are there, even when we cannot see. And in your name we ask, and everybody said, amen.